Welcome to Meet Me at the Wall. A podcast exploring author Anne Goodwin's time-traveling journey after discovering hundreds of letters written to her grandmother over a century ago. We visit the space where fact meets fiction, truth fosters imagination, and delve into the past while keeping an eye on how lessons from history affect us today and even tomorrow. We are back at the wall. Good morning, Anne.
Hey, Doug. Hey, Betsy.
Good morning. How are you?
We're all good.
I was prepared with something to lead this off, but I understand there's yet another new thing that you want to bring up.
Well, yes, we have news from the office.
Oh, great. I love office visits.
From the letters. 2 years and a half ago, Betsy and I started this project working together in the office, and our typical routine is maybe once a month we'll go spend 2 days, check in for a day, an evening, and then the next day. Yesterday we tried something new, and what we discovered, we had a little planned visit where we spent 2 hours in the office.
Together, you're physically in the office.
We met at the office for 2 hours, and we discovered that we cannot speed date with the letters. It does not work.
Yeah.
We were in total chaos. We walked in and we were buzzing around like crazy trying to figure out what we were doing next because we can't have a time limit with the letters. That it just doesn't work. But in that process of chaos, when we were trying to figure out how we were going to fill that 2 hours, a little thread popped up that goes back to a previous episode where you were mentioning ephemera.
Yes.
Well, Doug, I'm going to hand you this envelope that just popped out by itself. It was sitting on a table just by itself. And if you want to just open it up, you're going to have a ephemera experience. This is exactly what you were talking about.
This is from the Waldorf Astoria, which is a beautifully printed envelope. It says keep on it, I think. Florence wanted to make sure she kept this. And oh my goodness, there are all sorts of little artifacts in here. This is great. We've got a train ticket, the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Railroad ticket.
For 93 cents.
93 cents for that train trip. There's a beautiful little photo of...
We think my grandmother.
Your grandmother? Okay, cool. She's standing sideways, kind of
in a fun pose, I think.
Yeah,
sort of
in a very fun little goofy pose.
And this is Ted.
And then here's Ted. Oh, my goodness.
World War I
So this is her brother, Ted. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So he would have been 18, 19, so she would have been early.
Well, we will put
teens.
all of this into the show notes, of course. I'm still unpacking things. Oh, now we have...
This is one letter, ephemera packed.
Yeah,
envelope.
Tyson Company best seats for theaters, operas. Oh, there's a whole number. This is like a schedule of amusements in New York for the week ending November 20th, 1920.
Yes, and then you'll notice the marks next to the things that they did.
The marks, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 of them.
Shows and excursions.
Some more on the back. Beautiful.
So I think that was your definition.
That nailed it.
Yes, and then a letter from the hotel just talking about all of the activities. But I thought it was interesting she sent the train ticket. Like, what was the purpose of that? Was that a train ticket to be used, or was that a canceled train ticket?
It's hard to tell. Now, and this is from her mother. I don't think we pointed that out. This is from
Louise
her mother.
Westgate
from Louise.
To Florence at college. So I thought you would like that little gift.
I'm going to carefully tuck everything back in later as we're going to continue on. And that's just remind everyone that ephemera means for the day, which is interesting because it's kind of fleeting, right? We've talked about that. Although it also, in this context, means things like train tickets and dance cards and postcards or letters, things that were for the day, but in today's world, we view them as wonderful windows into history.
And that's what you have in front of you right now.
It is.
This letter full of ephemera.
Yay. So, Betsy, picking up from last episode, I know we started to talk a little bit, and I'd like to learn more about the Pullman Porter.
I did a little bit of a dive into the Pullman Company. It's really interesting.
Thank you.
It's a really interesting history that started after the Civil War in the late 1860s by a man named George Pullman, who developed this concept of sleeping cars for trains in order to improve the comfort of travel. And as he was developing this concept, not only the physical train cars and the amenities, he needed people to staff these cars. And that's when he designed this idea of the Pullman Porter. And at that time, in the late 1860s, there was a good workforce available in terms of Southern Black men who were fairly recently emancipated. So he became, at one point, the largest employer of African Americans in the country.
Really? Okay, so Pullman is the name of kind of the car, the company, essentially, that he developed, which would attach to different trains.
Yes.
So you'd have a Pullman train car
yes.
on a train. Okay.
They were considered hotel rooms on wheels.
Exactly.
Hotel rooms on wheels. Okay, sure.
Exactly. And they were owned by the Pullman Company and attached to various trains owned by other companies. So anyway, Pullman recruited these workers and made them porters. And this, in turn, was kind of a stepping stone for African Americans into a middle-class lifestyle in the United States. These were solid jobs. At the beginning, the income wasn't that great. They made low wages. They worked long hours. They had to work 400 hours a month or 11,000 miles. They survived as porters through tips, which is interesting because the tips almost equaled their wages at that time.
Is that where tipping began?
I don't know. That's an interesting question I should look into. But in the African American community, this was a good job. These were well-regarded citizens in the community. And after a while, the Pullman Porters organized into the first African American union in the United States. And then after that point, they were able to raise their wages and improve the working conditions for the Pullman Porters.
So at the time in the 20s that the sketches are set, that had already happened, right? That was early on. Okay,
yes.
Great. Interesting.
Yes. It was actually, wait a second, it was the mid-20s when the organizing
Oh, it was?
happened.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Oh, the name of the union, I know you want to know that, is the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. So not only did working conditions improve after that organization, but it's felt that that union actually set the stage for the civil rights movement in the 50s. It began in the 1950s.
Very interesting history. Thank you for that.
And as we mentioned in an earlier episode, there is a Pullman Porter Museum in Chicago, which is being refurbished at the moment, and a neighborhood of Pullman homes where it was like Pullman City. Was that what it was
I can't
called?
wait to see that.
I know. We'll make a plan.
So I also wanted to mention that the Porters were looked up to, and because they were earning a steady living, and then they were also well-traveled. So they were bringing news from other parts of the country back home and sharing that with their communities. They also were known to give back to their communities in terms of investing in schools and education for the youth. And in fact, Thurgood Marshall, Malcolm X, Gordon Parks were all descendants of Pullman Porters.
Fascinating. And our Mr. Jeffrey's in the middle of it all.
Yes,
He is. He is.
At that interesting time.
Right, exactly.
There's so much history, and it's interesting because if we're rewinding to the 1920s and you think of history then was from the 1800s. Every time you go back a notch, you've got all this history to learn that we maybe learned a little bit in high school or what have you, but unless you have an interest, it takes a bit.
It's a great point, and we experienced this yesterday when we were in the office for our 2 hours, and I started feeling like my present time was 1920.
Oh.
So when we talked about other letters that we found, it was either we have to go forward in history to the 30s or back in history to the 1890s.
So you start almost living in the 20s like it was present.
Yeah, we've lived in the 20s for a good solid 3 years, and I'm having problems moving forward to the 30s and 40s for season 2.
Are you? Right, because you need to be writing.
I'm so vested. Yeah, I'm vested in the 20s. But going back to how we even started to become interested in the Pullman lifestyle was this train porter that was part of my grandparents' life. And it's interesting because I really only have 2 references to him in the letters. So he has grown in his role out of just the ability, because there was so much train travel, to allow us to use him for our eyes and ears. But I did find the original source of where my grandmother said was her favorite story about when they were on the train married as opposed to being chaperoned, engaged people.
So this will be our From the Source this week.
This would be from our source. So this is from my grandmother's journal, which is a grandmother's journal, which just asked her a lot of questions about her life. And the question is, what is the funniest thing that ever happened to you during a trip? And she wrote, we had taken the same Penn train for years with many others going to school and college in the East, and often had the porter Jeff, and always had an upper or a lower. So when we got on the train for New York after we were married and had a stateroom, Jeff took one look at us and said, why, you must be married, in great astonishment.
Oh, I love it. I love it. That was, like we said, almost a direct quote, not from what she said, but what she wrote in this journal, which
exactly,
is
that was her
a
story.
Fun thing to leave behind.
That was her story.
Did her grandmother's journal inform other of your stories that you know of or you can think of?
Yes. Yeah. There are little tidbits in here. And when you ask a question and then I start reviewing things, it seems as if new information keeps popping up. I hadn't noticed because you had asked about my grandparents' wedding and what did that look like. And we knew that they had at least 125 people come to their home for the reception after their noon wedding. And in this journal is an exact description of their house by floor.
Wonderful. So is that worth reading? Do you want to pull that up?
Sure.
Yeah, are you talking the house for the wedding itself?
Yes,
like
where the reception
the decorations and all of that?
That is in the very detailed wedding announcement.
Okay.
Every floral arrangement that was at the church, that was in the pews, that was in the reception, every one of those are described in detail.
I don't think we do that anymore, do we? Are weddings described quite like that?
I don't think we do.
They're videoed and they're...
We have other ways of remembering them now.
Yes.
So it was a grand old house, and maybe not so old when they were living in it, but it was the Westgate House and in Titusville, Pennsylvania. And my grandmother lived there until she was married in 1922. And she wrote, a beautiful 3-story house with a mansard roof, downstairs front hall, parlor, large sitting room, library, dining room, kitchen, 2 pantries, maid's sitting room, 2nd floor, 5 bedrooms, play or sewing room, 2 bathrooms. Each bedroom had a little room with a marble wash basin, hooks for clothes, etc. 3rd floor, 2 bedrooms, billiard room, and long attic. And the house was still there in 1983. It was purchased by Penn College in Titusville, U of Penn College in Titusville, and then I think it was razed. It's not there anymore.
Well, that is a large home.
It was a large home.
That was a large home.
It was a large home.
So that was the home that the reception was at.
Yes, and where the wedding presents were in the sunroom.
So the bride's family's home.
Yes,
right.
and
Got it.
Theodore was recuperating
Nice.
in the parlor. So it was fun to just run across that description that just popped up for the first time, although I've probably read it, numerous times.
Yeah, I was thinking about just the idea of having 125 people come into my home.
Right.
That would be difficult.
That is a lot for a home.
That would be a tight fit. I was wondering if a large portion of the party took place in the yard.
The wedding announcements, which we'll put on in our picture album, describes that there was an 8-piece orchestra that was playing as well. So I think in my mind, it's an afternoon, and it hopefully is a beautiful afternoon in September. And people are meandering in and out, probably paying respects to Theodore, who's not well, and listening to this beautiful music. And there was a large cake as the centerpiece on the dining room table. And they did have a bridal party table set up in the dining room. And we can see that the bridal party was significant in numbers. So everything was just, I think, large and beautifully appointed. And I just have this feeling that people floated in and out for a home that could accommodate that crowd.
I think we've seen weddings like that in movies. As you're describing it, I can almost imagine it from a movie or two that I've seen where you have these kind of indoor-outdoor weddings at someone's home, grand old estate kind of thing.
It conjures up sort of a Gatsby
image
to me.
It does.
Definitely of that time.
And I also wanted to ask you just a little more about your grandmother, some of her pastimes. We've talked about this a little bit, and some of our upcoming sketches are going to cover this, but what did your grandmother like to do in her spare time, pastimes, passions?
I would describe my grandmother, she's a creative soul. She was a wonderful storyteller, dabbled at writing herself, and she also was a world adventurer. She and my grandfather traveled the world. And I have her notes and diaries from her trips, which are amazing, talking about being in Egypt and going down the Nile. And she loved to explore the world. She was a master floral arranger. That was her passion, flowers. And she also was a master bridge player. So she was very bright. And then she was on many service organizations. She was in garden clubs. And one of the service organizations was a group of women translating written word to Braille format for the visually impaired.
Wow. Really nice. A wide variety of things. And the whole, trying to explore and understand the world in different ways is commendable.
Yes, she was a bright and creative force and lived life large.
Thank you. Well, we are about to move on now to the sketches for the week. And I'll just remind everyone, last time we, of course, had the wedding, which we've just wrapped up talking about now. We had the honeymoon, a nice long honeymoon that I'm still jealous of. And it followed closely by Florence's dad's passing.
Yes, that's where they ended up. And I wanted to go back to just reiterate, we had talked about the tone of the Bob letter and how it seemed that my grandfather was disparaging towards women. And I wanted to set the record that out of anybody I knew in life, my grandfather was the most respectful person towards women and raised a woman. He raised his daughter, who ended up being invited to the first medical class of women for the University of Virginia. So she was a chemistry major. So he believed in women. He believed in their brilliance. And my grandmother and grandfather formed a good team of respect. They were great benefactors to their friends and family and people unknown. So I didn't want to leave with the picture that Ben was just, going to be a sourpuss about women all his life, because he definitely wasn't.
Of course. Makes good sense. And I remember you said that he was kind of a product of his times at that point, that particular letter.
Right. And he didn't want that haircut to happen.
Yeah. And so we all evolve.
Right.
I mean, I think everyone's views on so many things evolve as they go through life.
Right. So we saw his views changing from the 20s to the 30s to when I knew him as he is a great champion.
Why don't we talk about, we kind of had a Bob moment yesterday in the office when we were talking about the date of the photograph that's on the cover of the podcast, the Meet Me at the Wall photograph of the women on the wall at Sweetbriar. And we were trying to date it, remember? And you came up with this light bulb moment of, oh my gosh, it had to be 1922 because their hair is bobbed. Their hair would not have been bobbed before then.
Right. And we knew that the letter about the bob was, don't bob your hair until after Christmas, please. So we had put this photograph in 1920. We had thought it was when they started. But because of the bob, we pinned it down to, it's actually a photograph from 1922. And they're all bobbed and happy.
They're all bobbed.
Yeah,
okay.
Yes.
I love it. Thank you.
That was just a little discovery. A gift for Mr. Jeffrey, Titusville Platform, January 1923. Hey, Mr. Jeffrey, good to see you. We are ready to get out of this blasted cold. Ben hands Mr. Jeffrey his golf bags as he escorts his bride of 6 months to the Pullman car. Mr. Jeffrey shakes off the chill and receives the bag. Where are you headed with these, sir? We're going to chase the sun from North Carolina to Florida and hope not to see you again until the crocus are popping up again. Come spring, Ben replies. Later, as Ben and Flo head to the dining car together, they meet Mr. Jeffrey approaching them. Go ahead, my sweet, and find our table. I want a word with Mr. Jeffrey. Florence looks at both men and gives her old friend a smile and declares, Actually, I'm going to stay right here, Benny, my darling. After all, this was my idea. Mr. Jeffrey looks perplexed as Ben starts reaching into his coat pocket to pull out a large folded envelope. Mr. Jeffrey, we want to thank you for the kindness you bestowed us during Mr. Westgate's passing, for taking such good care of Florence all these years. This is a stock certificate in your name for a company called Standard Oil. And I want you to keep these shares and not touch them. If you do that, they will grow in value and compound to the point that when your little Belle is a grown girl and decides she wants to go to college, you will have funds to support that effort. For once, Mr. Jeffrey is speechless. He looks at Miss Florence's wide grin, turns his face to the side, grabs his handkerchief to capture an errant tear that has slipped down his cheek. My House is Your House, Crawford Basement, Titusville, Pennsylvania, November 1923. Walter, you may want to take a moment and reconsider your ante. I certainly don't want to take your house from you. Ben looks over at his friend across from him at the card table. Walter, feeling the effects of the dark rum, fueling his normally buoyant self, scoffs. The bet is placed, old Benny boy. Play your cards if you have them. Let's go. Ben slowly lays down his arranged hand. Walter looks down at his cards, at Ben's cards on the table, and declares, I'm out. He lays his hand face down in a tidy stack and continues, I'll bring the deed down to the courthouse tomorrow. You may want to pay me $1 or something to make the transfer legit. Ben stares hard at his friend, gathers the deck of cards without looking at Walter's hand, nods at the threesome at the table. I think that does it for tonight. He snuffs out his cigar and stands, indicating the evening is over. Oh, Ben, we can't possibly take Walter's house from him. He just bought it. Florence shuts her book, adjusts her blankets, and rolls over to turn off the lamp on her bedside table. I agree, my pet, but there's an honor code that is important to Walter as any piece of property he picks up. Just as in his golf game, he plays by the rules, no matter where they might land him. He sits on the side of the bed. I've been thinking, though, and there may be a way for this to work. Walter still owes me from an oil speculation that I sponsored. Maybe I can forgive that and we'll take the house instead. It's too big for a single man, and we could get busy figuring out how to fill it. Ben leans down and kisses Flo's lip with a twinkle in his eye. You smell like an ashtray. Florence rolls over, shuts off the light, and murmurs, whatever you decide, dear. Stick to Pickling, at home, November 1924, Titusville, Pennsylvania. Florence sits catching the last rays of sunshine lighting up the far corner of their side terrace. She looks out on the leaf-covered backyard and tucked-up tight perennial garden, dreaming about all the color and show that will greet her when spring comes around, their first spring in their new home. She rouses when she hears Ben's car door shut at the front walkway and smiles to herself as she thinks of the grand surprise she has in store for him. That smile ends abruptly when she hears, as she can only describe later, her dear sweet Benny yelling at her at the top of his lungs. Florence, what the hell is going on in the kitchen? Flo springs from her seat, scrambles down the length of the terrace, and enters the living room through the side door. She is immediately engulfed in smoke. She covers her mouth and nose with her pocket handkerchief and makes her way through the billows to the kitchen. Oh dear, she sighs, seeing curls of black smoke furling around the swinging door. She opens it and finds Ben, standing, with his back to her, facing the stovetop. On it is a roasting pan with several tidy rows of charred black ash heaps. After opening every window, door, and situating exhaust fans throughout the ground floor, Ben leads Flo outside to the front stoop. What on earth happened here? We almost lost the house. Well, surprise. Florence bows her head and looks down at her clasped hands and continues. I was attempting to make us some lovely BLTs for our Sunday supper, and I was waiting for the bacon grease to cook away and for it to crisp up, and there was so much grease that I just turned the oven up a tad and realized it would take a while to cook away, so I took a little sunbath on the terrace. Ben looks at Florence, who is so utterly defeated by her blunder that she cannot bear to look him in the eye, and moves close to her. He lifts her chin, looks into her teary, sooty eyes, and says, Stick to pickling things, my sweet, and we are getting about the business of hiring a maid on Monday. Hear the Roar, Auto Tour, Winter Break, 1924. Edith, are you sure Walter wants to do this? It seems silly to buy a new car when the one we drove down in is perfectly fine. Florence stands in the Cadillac dealership parking lot in Lord knows where, Georgia, surrounded by Benz and her suitcases. She eyes the two men finalizing Walter's on-the-fly swap and upgrade to the gleaming emerald green 1923 Phaeton touring car parked next to them. Edith replies, Oh, you know, Walt, it was a done deal the minute he saw the lot. Isn't she a beauty? We could host a cocktail party in the back seat. Ben and Florence sit in the back seat of the new car, the wind blowing their hair as they continue their return journey north after spending a month-long golfing tour along the eastern seaboard down to the tip of Florida. Florence grasps a 6-page letter from Muriel McLeod, posted to her full of news from her beloved Sweetbriar. The letter caught up with them at their last hotel. "Oh, Ben," Florence exclaims, "I'm so happy to hear that Shiny and her beau Frank are getting along famously. Muriel swears that there'll be a wedding. Can't imagine one without the other at this point. I'm so pleased. Frank is just the right man to keep Shiny on the bright side of things. She has those dips, and goes low." Florence keeps the letter in her lap to keep the breeze from catching the pages and reads further. "Oh, dear Lord, Benji, Lily Maddox stole Annie Ford's suitor right from under her nose. Muriel writes that Harry Whitner, who has been swooning over Annie for the last 9 months, they've met each other's parents, she has his pin and his ring, and he told Frank just last week that he wants to marry Annie. And then over the weekend, he meets Lily at a club dance in South Carolina. They meet for lunch and then got married on Tuesday. Harry even had the gall to write to Annie and told her he married Lily and hoped Annie would understand and would come visit them over Easter. And then he sent her a bouquet of violets and roses without a card. What on earth were those two thinking? I am done with Lily Maddox." The car falls silent and Walter begins to speed up, testing his new beauty on the freshly minted north and south highway. The wind whips all sides of the auto and Florence begins refolding Muriel's letter, determined to read it again later. She sighs and shares the last tidbit of news she's gleaned. Oh, Shiny, Bird, Annie, Gert, Muriel, and scads of others had a picnic down at the lake. Oh, how I wish we could visit my girls on our way home. She dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief, eyes watering from the wind. Can we make a detour? Ben, acutely aware of Florence's potential post-wedding and post-father's passing emotional precipice once they return home, taps Walter on the shoulder. Hey, Walt, did I mention to you how my angel almost burned down your grand old house trying to broil the grease out of the bacon? I think for a detour, we should drive through the Carolina Sandhills, check out a few golf courses, and then maybe find ourselves a lot or two to build a winter home for us all. We might need a spare one. What do you think, my sweet? Florence dabs at her eyes one more time, smiles at Ben and says, "Whatever you think is best, dear." She leans back, raises her arm above her head, and releases her hanky into the wind. Back to the girls. Sweetbriar, May 1924. "Miss Florence, where is your better half this morning?" Mr. Jeffrey steps down to assist with Florence's bags. "I'm on my way to Sweetbriar for the girls' graduation. My first solo trip as a married woman. Sure is good to see you again, Mr. Jeffrey." The next day, Florence and several of her girls, the graduating seniors, Shiny, Muriel, and Anne, walk the hill path down to the pond where they prepare their nest in their usual picnic spot overlooking the water. "I sure wish Bertie could have joined me on the train down," Florence rues, but brightens as she continues. "But I'm glad she is situated with her brother and his family for the time being." "Well, we sure are glad you're with us, Flossie Belle." Shiny pats the blanket next to her, and Florence, after twirling around once to take in the landscape she keeps emblazoned in her mind's eye, smiles and gently drops down next to her best friend. "Girls, catch me up on all the news I've missed since my last drive-through, and let me know your plans after you are sprung from this place come Sunday." "Well, you heard all the buzz about Lily Maddox from Muriel, so we won't go into that. And Anne, you can tell Flozo your news since you dodged that cad." Shiny looks towards Anne. Anne Ford shakes her head and smiles back at Shiny. "Cat is right, and I did dodge a bullet. I'm looking forward to our final tennis match this week. We might even beat Lynchburg. And then from there, I'm headed home to Charleston to plan my fall tour abroad. I'm so ready for a complete change of scenery and no responsibility." She removes the class president insignia from her jacket's lapel and places it in her pocket. "Oh, look, here comes Kay. What on earth is she wearing?" All eyes turn towards Kay, who is bounding down the path in what appears to be a costume made up of disparate bits and pieces. Oh, that's Kay these days, literally running between honor society, thus the Cape, field hockey, dramatics, and she probably shot some basketball on her way while speaking French the entire time prepping for the French club skit coming up. She never seems to run out of energy, Muriel explains to Florence. She continues, "I hear she's on pins and needles waiting to hear from the dance studio. She's hoping to enroll in the fall." Shiny sighs and looks at Florence. "I'm waiting on Frank's plans. I hope to get some rest at home so I can shake whatever has me feeling so strange inside. When I'm with all of you, I feel like 1,000 shining lights inside. But when I'm alone, it all comes crashing down in a million pieces, and I can't even find my way out of bed. Florence squeezes Shiny's hand. I know, my pet. Thank goodness for Frank. He'll love you no matter how many times he has to help put those pieces back together. Muriel squeezes Shiny's other hand. Well, since Florence didn't find me that rich millionaire from Florida, it seems I'm going back to Milwaukee to teach French at my alma mater. I'll be an old spinster before I'm 25 at the rate things are going. Girls, now that Kay is here, let's do a pinky promise pledge. I can hardly bear the thought of all of us leaving Sweetbriar behind us. We must promise, just like during Bird's adoption ceremony, that our sisterhood will remain intact. We must make plans to see each other regularly. I say we make New York City our new haunt. The girls solemnly close in a circle and join hands, each dedicating their pledges to a future of undying sisterhood. Miss Florence, are you ill? Let me help you back to your roomette. Mr. Jeffrey gently glides Florence's elbow towards the front of the dining car. Well, thank you. This is so silly. I felt fine, and then suddenly not. I can't imagine what could be wrong. Florence is grateful for the support as another wave of nausea begins to swell. I'll just rest until we get back to Titusville. I can't wait to share with Ben all the news from Sweetbriar. Mr. Jeffrey smiles gently as he continues to lead Florence and says quietly under his breath, I wonder if there'll soon be more news for you to share.
Love the cliffhanger, Anne.
Tune in next episode.
Yes, next episode. So one of the questions I have now that we can reflect on the sketches is it seems like Ben hasn't quit smoking yet. He's referring to the ashtray. Do you know, did he ever quit smoking or did he smoke his whole life?
He did quit smoking at some point. I did not know him as a smoker. But we have an engagement picture portrait on the wall where he's holding a cigarette.
Sure.
Very debonair. We can put that on the page. And I think that when the guys got together and played cards, it was pretty typical.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question I had for you, too, is Walter's relationship with Ben and Florence. Can you just give us a little more background? Because we're hearing a lot about Walter right now, and yet I don't quite understand how he fits in and what you've learned from letters or what have you.
Walter's a really interesting guy.
Is he?
Yeah.
Why?
And Ben were lifelong friends and golf partners.
Golf competitors. We do cover Walter quite extensively in the next batch of vignettes, which tells his story. But we can preface Walter with the fact that he was an exuberant speculator in the oil business. He lived life large. And and if you want to ask me if it's true or not true, whether he actually...
We're going to have to interrupt this comment now and cue the music. Okay. Let's just do that. It's time for fact or historical fiction. Okay, yes, Anne, you were intuiting that I was going to be asking about. My big question this week is, did Walter really lose his house betting in a card game?
Well, I'm going to say that is fiction.
Oh, finally, we get a fiction. I don't know if we even had a fiction yet.
Although Walter did have the house before my grandparents had the house. And I have no idea why he sold them their house. And it was a large house for a single man. So I don't know if he was speculating in real estate as well. So I just figured he just lost it because that would be Walter. He would bet large and lose often. Now, if you want to ask me fact or fiction, whether he actually bought a new car in the middle of a trip,
sure.
He did do that.
He did do that.
He did do that.
How did you discover that? It was in a letter?
My grandmother. She used to describe how he found a new Cadillac and they purchased it mid-trip. That would be Walter Critchlow.
And he's driving them around just because he likes to do things with them. And
they're two couples who were friends and they were on an auto tour together on a golfing tour south.
Got it.
And he saw a car in the lot and pulled in, and they drove out in the new one. Walter was a pioneer aviator, which is a really interesting mixture of personality, because when you think of a pilot and how regimented and careful and the personality of someone who's going to fly a plane, well, back when they were made out of balsam wood and paper and, going up in the air, it took a real adventurous spirit to have that type of bravery. So Walter fit that part of the scenario. He had that enthusiasm, that adventuresome. But how he was as a pilot is left to be seen. So can I just say I had to think about something?
Sure, you can. What were you thinking about?
As we reflect on our conversations.
Yes.
We were talking about how the post was so important.
Yes,
the twice a day.
Twice a day. I still can't get over that.
People were connected via writing and feeling connected when they were writing, when they were reading, when they were receiving, when they were sending. Like we feel connected in our constant technical communication with texting and TikTok and whatever. It occurred to me that back in the day when they were writing letters, the telephone existed as well. However, it was expensive and it wasn't easy to plan phone calls. You had to go through an operator and the phone wasn't handy. And I was thinking about how as a society, we have gone from writing to the telephone and verbally speaking with each other, and the hours and hours of time as teenagers we used to spend on the phone.
I remember
And
that.
it was all
yes.
about the telephone, and how societally we have gone back to writing to each other, and we have even gone to the point where we are not even writing full letters or words anymore. We're just, everything is like it's a U or an R, and we are avoiding talking to each other, which gets to be ridiculous when you have 7 texts going back and forth. Saturday, what time? Blah, blah, blah. Well, we could just call someone and say, do you want to get together for lunch on Saturday? It doesn't happen. We don't want to interrupt people with phone calls. And I just wondered, when did that switch happen? Because I don't call people anymore.
Yeah, I think we're all guilty of that to some degree.
Absolutely. I used to love talking on the phone for hours to my friends as a teenager. And now I avoid it at all costs. It makes me uncomfortable. I don't want to talk on the phone.
Why have we become uncomfortable talking to each other on the phone and reaching first always for something in writing now, but it's not the same? And I wonder if the ear telephone will just become obsolete at some point, just listening by phone, by ear. We are sort of bound by this technology, and new trends are affecting how we're relating with each other. What I find interesting is that the letter collection stops in pretty much the 1950s and 60s. And I think that's when my grandmother started talking on the phone to her friends as opposed to writing letters. So once the phone became, as it was for us, very important in that time, 50s, 60s, 70s, the letters stopped. So it just occurred to me that we're learning from the past and looking at the future with a different lens when we compare how people connect.
I do remember last time we were going to try to understand who came to the wedding, how many came, how many were invited. And I know I took a crack, you had a good friend took a crack, Tracy took a crack at decoding this wedding invitation book.
We're going to the FBI.
So far we have failed. We have completely failed. The marks and dashes and letters and colors in this book are quite unique.
I'm going to give it a crack.
All right.
So Betsy, we'll carry that again. We'll carry that one forward to the next episode and see what you come up with. Well, thank you again for listening to Meet Me at the Wall. Next time, we're going to fly high and low. And you'll have to tune in to see what I mean by that.
Sounds good.
Anne, thanks for being here again, and thanks for everything you've done with us.
It's been fun, as always.
Betsy.
It's always a pleasure.
We look forward to your homework next week.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Thank you both. Meet Me at the Wall is hosted by Doug Martinet, Ann Goodwin, and Betsy Schmeeken. Music is written and performed by Alex Vance. This podcast is copyright 2025 by Pleasurable Pause Press. Thank you for listening, and we hope you tune in again next time.